One of the most significant pro bono projects that I've worked on is lasted about 6 years, where I represented the victims of the Tulsa race riot of 1921. And what that involved was an African-American community that was very prosperous back in the day that had been completely destroyed within a 24-hour period of time. Their homes were burned to the ground, churches, schools. There were about 10,000 people left homeless. About 300 people were killed who were part of that community. So it was probably the worst race riot in the history of our country. So that happened in 1921. Certainly African Americans at that time could not seek relief through the justice system. It did not work for them. So if you sort of fast forward about 80 years, there was a bipartisan commission that did an investigation that lasted 4 years, and they came out with this report that unearthed all of the facts related to what had happened, including the fact that the government had participated actually in this riot. So at that time in 2001, myself and a group of attorneys decided that we were going to get together and try to represent the victims of the Tulsa race riot of 1921. Which was really a formidable task. I mean, we had a statute of limitations problem clearly to deal with because the case is about 3/4 of a century ago. But there was really a group, I guess a dream team of attorneys that came together. There was some of the best legal minds in the country were thinking about how do we get restitution. So we had Johnny Cochran, we had John Hope Franklin, we had Charles Ogletree, a variety of people that were working on this. And we represented a good group. My clients are about in their late 90s. The oldest one is 106 years old. So we worked very hard to represent them and to represent that little boy who back in 1921 did not have a chance of seeking justice and of fighting that fight that needed to be won. We worked pretty steadily through the court system, the federal court system. Once we exhausted that, we then went to the International Tribunal. We went to the Organization of American States, arguing that there were human rights violations. And then when that did not work, we in fact crafted some legislation trying to get the statute of limitations tolled for our clients. So it has been quite a journey. And you know, it's been wonderful. Even though the legal system has its limitations, I think we've really brought the issue to the fore and have represented people, given voice to people who never had a voice before. The reason I do pro bono work, and the reason I think it's so important, is none of us get there alone. We all have to make a contribution, and we all count on each other to make it. When you think about the legal system, it's based on principles like equality, fairness, justice, very sort of lofty ideas. And in order to really make those ideas come true, it takes a lot of work. I'm reminded by, there's a quote that Cornel West uses, and he says that justice is love in action. And I really believe that. I think it might sound a little weird to talk about love, but it's really true. It's not good enough to just talk about these ideas of justice and equality and fairness, but it's important to work. It's important to have that action component. And it is a lot of hard work, rolling up your sleeves and trying to make a difference. But we all count, and we all can make a contribution in terms of resources, in terms of energy, experience, whatever you can bring. Each one of us is important, and we all are required to make those concepts actually come true.
There are two pro bono cases that are taking up most of my time these days, and they're actually matters that I've been working on for one about 5 years, one about 10 years, dating back to law school. The one that's the oldest is a challenge to a law in Massachusetts that restricts how close people can speak to abortion clinics. My clients are some very pleasant old ladies who show up at abortion clinics basically to tell people, hey, there are other alternatives. We know people who can put you up if you need a place to live, give you free medical care. You don't have to feel like this is your only option. And they're peaceful people, never broken a law in their life, never bothered anybody in their life. But Massachusetts has passed laws that say no matter how peaceful you are, you can't be that close to the clinic, even though it's a public forum, even though it's the sidewalk. That's a case that started for me back when I was in law school. Massachusetts passed the first version of this law back then, and really based on something I had learned in my First Amendment class as a 3L, I thought, wait, that doesn't fit with the Constitution. And I wrote something about it and got in touch with some lawyers, and we got an injunction against it before I even took the bar. And we've been fighting on and off and losing since then, but we've been fighting for the last 10 years, and now we think we got a good shot to go to the Supreme Court, so we're very excited about that one. The second one is defending some pharmacists in Illinois, a Catholic pharmacist and a Christian pharmacist who don't believe that they can sell the morning after pill consistent with their religious beliefs. Back in 2005, Governor Blagojevich instituted a rule that basically said you have to sell that one particular drug, and if you don't, you can lose your license. And these are people who've run pharmacies in the state for 20 or 30 years. They've spent their whole lives building up this business, but because of their religious beliefs, they just can't sell that one particular drug. That's a case that we've been working on for about 5 years, taking it all the way from the trial court up to the state Supreme Court, just to convince the courts in Illinois that we had a right to sue about it. But we did that. We succeeded at the Illinois Supreme Court. Now we're back down at the trial court, and 5 years later, we've got the law preliminarily enjoined, and we're moving toward trial. I've always found pro bono work important because it's given me a chance to think about how do I use this tool that I've developed, my legal education, to actually do something in the world. I mean, I went to law school thinking that a law degree and a legal education is a tool. It's something that you can do something with. And so I've always thought about, okay, how do I do something with that from my point of view, makes the world a better place. And so I've always been sort of on the lookout for what are the chances I have to use this tool and do something good in the world, in addition, of course, to using this tool to earn a salary and support my family, which are two of the big things everyone's got to do. I'd say the side benefit to pro bono work in my career has been I've been able to do much cooler stuff at much higher levels, much earlier in my career on my pro bono cases than I was ever allowed to do on my paying cases. On a paying case, when someone's fighting about $50 billion, they don't want someone my age talking to the judge. But when it's my pro bono case, I was arguing at the First Circuit Court of Appeals when I was less than a year out of law school, and I've had 4 or 5 high-level appellate arguments in my first few years of practice, precisely because I went out and found cases that interested me. There was a need for someone to do it, and I was willing and able to do it. And so because of that, I've actually gotten great training that served me well in private practice, and I think keeps serving me well here. So it makes me feel good to work on something I care about, and it's also beneficial to me.
Yeah.
Over the course of my career, I've worked on several pro bono matters. One that sticks out in my mind is a matter that I worked on for a small nonprofit child care center. One of my colleagues lived in the area where the child care center was located, and so she was contacted, and then she asked if I would be interested in helping out on the case. She was on maternity leave at the time, and so I was happy to take over and to help these clients who, this was their business, but it was also very personal for them, and this child care center was really their life, and they had dedicated the past 30 years to it. So it was a significant amount of money that the IRS was claiming they owed, and it really would have impacted their ability to run the center. And so we helped the center, and we discovered after a long investigation, and we spent a significant amount of time reviewing the tax documents and going over years of IRS filings and filings with the state tax authority as well. We discovered that a long-term employee for the child care center, someone who had worked there for 20 years, who the couple, it was a married couple who ran the center. They considered her family, that she had actually been, she had been embezzling money from the center for many years. So while it was, obviously very upsetting for our client to learn that what had been going on with the employee, it made it much easier to deal with the IRS and to figure out what was going on in terms of the taxes, and then to approach the case from a legal standpoint with respect to the IRS. There are a lot of reasons that I choose to spend time on pro bono work. The most obvious reason and the most important reason for me is because I know that there are people who need my services, and I find it very satisfying, and it's a completely different experience than providing legal services to business clients. And while that is satisfying for other reasons, for the most part, the pro bono cases I've worked on, I've really felt like I am helping and benefiting my clients, and that they appreciate it in a way that a business client doesn't necessarily feel. These are usually matters that are very personal, even if it's an organization and it's a nonprofit organization, it's your client's business. It's still, for the most part, in my experience, they're very personal matters. And in all the pro bono cases I've worked on, I've developed close relationships with my client, and I've found the work to be extremely satisfying. Another reason, especially as a young lawyer, I really appreciated the opportunity to work on pro bono matters, because sometimes opportunities were presented to me in those cases that I did not get on matters for paying clients. So, for example, I took my first deposition and defended my first deposition in a pro bono matter, and had other opportunities as a young lawyer that helped train me and shape me as a lawyer that I think might not have been made available to me had I opted not to partake in the pro bono matters.
A couple of the more recent cases that are memorable to me, one dealt with a case that came to me with the possibility of filing a bankruptcy, and we ended up settling the debt. And the other was a family law case, which is where I do a lot of my pro bono work, in which involved the distribution of marital assets. The family had been married, as a young couple, had been married maybe 3 or 4 years, and I think they had truly loved each other when they entered into that marital bond. They had no children before the marriage, nor any children during the marriage, so at the time of the divorce, it really became an equitable distribution of the marital assets. I was representing the husband, and I don't remember precisely how he referred to me, but when I initially talked to him, I thought that this would not be a very difficult case, and we would be able to just simply determine what the assets were, the liabilities, and come up with a fair settlement of that dispute. What I learned after I met with him, that one of the things that destroyed the marriage was an incident that occurred during the marriage. He went out one evening from the marital home, and I believe it was to a neighborhood store, and he was jumped by some people, knocked unconscious, and suffered traumatic brain injury. He actually was unconscious and in the hospital for 6 to 8 months. When he came to, he had basically been an adult, was rather an adult in a human body with the mind of an infant. He had to learn to talk, to feed himself, to clothe himself, to bathe himself all over again. And that was very fascinating for me, that this man had suffered that kind of trauma. And I had come into his life probably a year after that, so he was a lot better. He was now receiving his outpatient care. He was back home. But that kind of care that he needed, I believe, broke the marital home apart. His wife, who was taking care of him, became ill herself. And I think in part, just the emotional side of dealing with him, combined with, I think she was having some problems with her employer, and it just broke that family apart. For him, he had contributed to the marital home, and what I learned was that the marital home actually was the separate property of the wife, that she actually owned that home, had it titled to her prior to the marriage. What he did not know was that a promise made that upon marriage he would be placed on the deed never occurred. During the marriage, he had made several improvements to the home. He was very handy with his hands, and he contributed to the monthly expenses, including the mortgage. So it became, for me, a matter of reaching a decision, or at least an amicable outcome with regard to, did he have an equitable interest in that home? What was it? And then square that with the marital liabilities to see if there would be any net gain for him in that transaction. And that was very, very difficult, because two people whose memories are now impaired, him by a traumatic brain injury, and I believe her by the emotion of losing this relationship and having to care for a grown man who's almost like a child again. We took depositions and learned from each what their assets and liabilities were, at least from the way they understood it in the marital home. But for whatever reason, we were unable to settle that case. We therefore went to trial. We would be in the courtroom, and I would be either questioning a witness or about to question my own witness, and my client would sometimes raise his hand seeking permission to speak in the court. And the judge, I think, really got a sense of what was going on. Instead of us calling witnesses to the witness stand, he allowed us to simply question the witnesses at the table where we were sitting with my client. Instead of asking on direct examination, non-leading, open-ended questions, he allowed me to lead the witness as I began with the traditional inquiry, what's your name and where do you live? He got his name out, but gave us an address in which he did not live. So we went on through the proceedings. I think I had finished the cross of the parent witness, the wife's witnesses, and now we were on my turn. It was at that point where we realized that this case ought settled. And we started to crunch the numbers and saw that though he may have an equitable interest in the home, when you juxtapose that with the marital liabilities, it was probably going to be a net flat zero gain. And once we all came to our senses, both sides, we actually settled that case. But that case was most memorable because of the challenge of just making sure that my client understood what the situation was and what I would try to be able to do for him with no guarantees. But I think it was very difficult because at that time, since he now had no place to go but to go back home with his parents, he was basically going to be homeless and wanted to get some money out of the house that he had put in. But he came to understand that when you're in a marriage, you also have liabilities, and unfortunately, you're responsible for them as well. That was a very, very memorable case for me, and it really shows the importance of pro bono work in terms of entering the life of someone at that stage and helping them through what was for him a very, very difficult time. So that's one of my most memorable. The reason pro bono is important to me, I feel as a lawyer with the skill sets that I have, that I should give back, I want to give back, and there's so many unmet needs of people in our community that it should be our responsibility to give back. Yes, that, you know, it's almost a reason for being. When I was learning to become a lawyer, I realized the importance of giving back. I would meet people who had needs. Of course, when you're in law school, they begin right then first day. If they hear the word law school, lawyer, people assume you can answer their legal question. And I realized that there were so many needs that were there being unmet. For them to come to a first day, first year, first week law student seeking relief. And that suggested to me that one of the things I wanted to do was, of course, to use my law license to make money and to be in the business of law, which is part of what we are engaged in when we go to law school and become lawyers, but also in the practice of law, to be able to give those skill sets that I've acquired back to people who really need those skill sets. And so for me, it's sort of the rent you pay for your existence here on this earth, service to others. And so it has been a calling of mine. I recall growing up that doctors would come to our house. You wouldn't go to the doctor, they would come to you. And I actually became that kind of lawyer. For people who had those unmet legal needs, I would go to their home, and I still do today, sit with them at their dining room table where they can gain trust and confidence in me and in the comfort of their home, explain to them what I think their legal rights obligations are, explain precisely what it is I can do to help them, and there they make the decision as to whether they want to engage me to help them achieve their client goal. But for me, it isn't really duty. I know that we are encouraged by our bar associations, both the bar associations that I'm a member of, as well as the American Bar Association, as well as the law school itself. But for me, it's really something that I absolutely enjoy doing. And I would have to say that when I have served pro bono clients, and I've never treated them as that, I treated them and they got the same service as anyone else. But the pay that they gave me, that hearty, heartfelt thank you, sometimes with tears in their eye, was the greatest reward that I have ever received as payment for legal services. And it motivates me to the next case.
I think there's a great opportunity for students to get involved in pro bono cases even while they're students and before they even take the bar exam. When I was a law student, I was able to work on some amicus briefs as a student, and those are situations where myself and some fellow students really just put into practice, applying them to real-world situations, the doctrines that we were learning in constitutional law or federal courts, and we would largely put together an amicus brief, and there was a local lawyer who was willing to review it, teach us a little bit about how to do it better and sort of fix things that people doing it the first time might do wrong, but basically get it in good shape, and he would submit the brief under his name, so we would get a chance to write these things up for real courts, courts of appeal, the Supreme Court, and know that our work was going someplace, even though we weren't yet licensed to practice on our own and hadn't taken a bar exam. So there's definitely an opportunity if people are on the lookout for places where there are issues and things they care about. There are things to do, and there are a lot of people out there who would like free help, so there are lots of opportunities.
Pro bono or public service work is very important to me for many reasons. I think I'm an immigrant, and when many people see the United States as a land of opportunity, but for me it's always been a land of accountability, where if there's an injustice, someone is going to stand up and address that issue. And I think that view was mostly based on my reading of the civil rights movement and similar movements when I was a child or when I was growing up. So I think in order to have this accountability, then you need enough people working on these issues, and you need enough people working to represent the people from the population who are not able to afford legal service. So I think it empowers people to know that they have these rights, because some people don't even know that they have these rights. It empowers them to basically stand up for themselves so that they're not always depending on others to do for them.
Great, thank you.
My first public interest job was at the end of my first year in law school, and it was a very good experience because somewhere between the time that I got into law school in August and second semester where I had to look for a job, I think I had lost a lot of my focus, and I had lost a lot of the reasons why I originally came to law school. So this internship was with Legal Counsel for the Elderly, and they're a local organization affiliated with the AARP, and they do consumer protection work. They also do landlord-tenant issues. They have a legal advice line, and they also have a home visits attorney. And I work with her over the summer, and it was me and another intern from another law school, and we would go visit the elderly at their homes and talk to them about what legal issues they had. And sometimes it would be very complicated. Some of them needed help with getting power of attorneys, guardians, really sensitive and difficult issues. And other times it would be helping them to navigate Social Security. And at first you'd think it's something very easy, just call up Social Security and it should be fine. But when we took on these cases and we had to do the work, and you realize that it would be very difficult for an 80-year-old person who maybe doesn't have a lot of education, who might have other things going on, such as illnesses and things like that, to wait on the phone with Social Security for half an hour. So I think that experience was very important in helping me refocus on why I came to law school, on just realizing that, yes, the loans are a lot, but helping people is also very important, and there is such a need out there. So it was probably one of the best experiences because of that.
For 3 years, we've worked with the Mississippi Center for Justice down in Biloxi, Mississippi. It's my first year, I just went along. My second year, I helped organize it. At the Mississippi Center for Justice, they started, before Katrina, to help the working class and the poor with, various issues, maybe housing issues, or just a general legal aid. And after Katrina, their focus turned to Katrina relief and issues that were going on with Katrina. My first year going, we worked on informing people about the formaldehyde in trailers. It was causing a lot of sicknesses, respiratory problems. So we were informing people about their rights with their FEMA relief, because FEMA was, kind of doing a misinformation campaign, telling them they had to leave their trailers earlier than they needed to, and it was really causing people to make hasty decisions and just rush and leave the area that they've, some people have called home for a few generations. Last year they had us split up into groups, and my group went to help this organization with housing discrimination in the area, with people with disabilities, and they just don't know their rights in terms of, what types of housing the landlords have to do, under federal law. Last year we flew into New Orleans, and we volunteered at an inn that was a homeless shelter, and this was a really interesting place because all the workers there were formerly homeless, and they lived there too. So it was great for them to, to have a place to stay. And then they also ran the soup kitchen on their own. So we volunteered one afternoon and helped them organize all their food stock and things of that nature. Some people got to serve food, but I was just in the back. I think it's a great experience. I mean, your first year of law school, or any year of law school, most of the time you're in the classroom and it's theory. And if you want to go to law school to help people or to, in one way or another, this is a good way to get out there and do some hands-on work that's just not available during the year. Everybody comes from a different background. You know, when we get to law school, we're all in pretty good shape. You know, even the worst person off in law school is in good shape because you've made it this far. You know, but there's people who just might not have caught that break, you know, that they need, and there's just, you know, they still need a little bit of help, you know, and just to be able to do that is important.
My first pro bono experience was going to Biloxi, Mississippi with the Legal Services Society. And my group specifically was working with the Gulfport Fair Housing Center. And a lot of the work we were tasked with was a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that the organization was looking for. And their primary objective is to go out into the community and advocate for basically fair housing for people that otherwise can't afford housing or can't afford rent and things like that. So we did a lot of research on eminent domain. We made some brochures that explained what are your rights as a tenant and what are their rights as a landlord. We looked into modifications and accommodations for persons with disability, and we actually got to go out into the community at one point and survey the residents to see what their perceptions were for discrimination in housing in the area. Going out and seeing the face of what they're actually working for was probably the most rewarding and interesting part of the trip. Last semester, I volunteered with the Neighborhood Legal Services Program in Southeast DC. So I was there probably about 5 to 6 hours a week, depending. And I did all sorts of things for them. Basically, I would come in and they'd give me files, and they would just say, could you research this issue, or can you go through this and see what our biggest, you know, say our most legitimate thing would be to approach this with certain cases. So it was anything ranging from, I did some domestic violence issues, I did some custody issues, I did a landlord-tenant case, I did one where someone was discharged from the school she was attending and wanted to know what her rights were for that. So some were a little bit easier, some were a little bit more complicated, some involved hearings and they were in court, and others were just, you know, clients that wanted to know their rights. So it was an interesting mix of things. I got a little bit of background in employment law, which I know nothing about, so that was good. But it was interesting to see the different issues that are out there and the different concerns people have. Well, I came to law school because I want to help people. It's always been kind of the thing I've enjoyed, and I've always been inclined to do law, so I figured why not combine helping people with something that I enjoy personally. And I've always thought, you know, I have this wonderful opportunity to go to law school and to get this legal education. Why not give it back to the people that otherwise don't have that opportunity?
I'm just honored to be back here at CUA where it all began. When I was a third year, I ran the spill auction. And one of the people on the planning committee at that auction was a smart and beautiful and funny first year from Dallas, Texas, who I really enjoyed working with. She later became my wife. And we have 2 beautiful kids. So let me start by saying that you do pro bono work here, you probably find your spouse. Spill was critically important to me because I received a very small stipend to work at the Alexandria Public Defender's Office. When I was at the PD's office, I caught the bug. I just knew at that moment that service to the indigent criminal defense was my calling. But also when I was a third year, I took a clinic, DC Law Students in Court. Phenomenal clinic. I encourage you to take it. We represented defendants in criminal cases in DC Superior Court. My first client was someone who had alleged to have taken a bike. And I was really passionate about this defense of this client. I fought it hard. I took it to trial, cross-examined all the police officers, pounded the table, made a passionate argument, but we lost. So I went downstairs in the lockup and I said, hey man, I'm so sorry. I worked really hard for you. And he said, hey man, don't worry about it. I stole the bike. But what he said next is something I'll never forget. He said, but thank you for standing up for me. So that's really the message I want to give you. Simple, powerful, and one for you to take your whole career. So that became my mission, to stand up for folks, no matter what. I put that into practice for a couple years. I was a public defender in Brooklyn, New York with the Legal Aid Society. And that's a place where standing up for people takes on a whole new level. Thousands of people I represented over the course of my time, each with their own unique stories of poverty, addiction, and crime. Twice a month I had to do night arraignments from 5 p.m. to 1 a.m. I got dozens of new cases every time. I'd go back in the lockup, give them my card and say, I am your attorney. I'm going to work hard for you. It was empowering for them and incredibly meaningful for me. So it was my goal not just to stand up for them, but to get them drug treatment, counseling, job placement. Remember one case I got a guy off of a serious felony charge with very little jail time. And he said, instead of thank you, he said, hey man, let's go to McDonald's. I really want a Big Mac. I haven't had one in a long time. So I did. We had two. I had a meal with him. And that moment of service, selfless service, is something that I've never forgotten. So after my time as a public defender, I went back into firm life. And I work at K&L Gates downtown because of something called law school loans. But when I went back into firm life, I told the people who hired me that pro bono work was incredibly important to me, and it must be done not just for me, but for other junior lawyers. And they agreed, and in the 5 years I've worked there, I've done more than 2,000 hours of pro bono service. I've received several awards. I have a very good relationship with the Archdiocesan Legal Network of Catholic Charities, a really wonderful organization that puts needy clients in touch with lawyers who can handle the work. But in addition to the number of cases I've taken for the legal network, the firm put me in charge of representing a mentally challenged and innocent man on death row. There's the words etched on the outside as you walk in from the metro saying justice, honor, integrity, equality. And working for a mentally challenged and innocent man on death row is all of those things put together. To be able to work on that kind of case for a man who probably would otherwise have been executed but for our work, I'm honored to do it every time, and that's the reason why I became a lawyer. A few months ago, I went to go see my client on death row, and I got to do one of my favorite things. When an attorney visits someone on death row, you can buy them up to $20 of vending machine food. And I asked him, what do you want? And it's chips, soda, candy, probably 10 Hershey bars. And he gets to eat whatever he wants. He has a huge stomachache every time I leave him, but he's very happy. But it is that moment, which is a tiny miracle every time, because he gets to have the food he wants and have someone friendly to chat with. Last time I saw him, he had finished his big dinner, and he said to me, why are you doing all this for me? And I remembered the words of my first client who stole that bike. I said, I'm standing up for you, man. So please, as a law student and as a lawyer, stand up for someone or something. Be passionate, whether you're a government prosecutor protecting a victim, you're representing an indigent defendant, whether he's guilty or innocent, writing a contract, doing a negotiation, forming a corporation, or volunteering for a nonprofit. Leave the profession better than how you found it. Get involved now, stay involved when you're a lawyer, and I'll guarantee you have a rich and rewarding legal career.